Hello, welcome everybody to our webinar today. We're going to talk a bit about how to build a minimum lovable product. My name is Jake Laverne, and I am a Senior Director of Product Management here at DigitalOcean, focused on developer experience. And the things we'll learn about today and really dig into is making sure we're listening to our users, to our customers, trying to understand what people need from our product as we build and iterate on it. Just a few housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and the video will be shared with you via email and also posted on the DigitalOcean YouTube channel and also on the DigitalOcean community at do.co/techtalks. If you have any questions, please type them in the questions box. We'll answer as many as we can live at the end of this talk, but if we don't get to your question live, we'll answer it in the next week or two on do.co/techtalks. So we'll follow up with written answers, and you'll get a link to that via email. So sort of with that housekeeping out of the way, we'll dive right in. Again, no need to worry. I'm going to reference a lot of materials, third-party materials and links, but they're all included in the presentation that we'll post afterwards. So with that, again, I'm Jake, Senior Director of Product Management here. And before we dive straight into the topic, I just want to talk a little bit about the challenges that we're all facing with COVID-19. One thing we're doing at DigitalOcean is Hub for Good. And so there is a link, or you can Google DigitalOcean Hub for Good and see what we're doing to help projects that support COVID-19 get the compute resources that they need. And so just a little bit about DigitalOcean. If you're not familiar with us, we were founded in 2012 in New York City, $1 billion plus company. And to date, over 100 million droplets or virtual machines have been launched on the DigitalOcean cloud. 1.5 million developers and teams worldwide making use of DigitalOcean. We have over 570 employees, and according to Netcraft, we're the third largest and fastest growing provider of web-facing servers on the internet. So hopefully, if you need cloud for anything, we can help you out. We have 14 data centers in 8 global markets, and we manage tons and tons of storage and virtual machines and have a massive network. And some of the capabilities that we have, droplets or VMs, managed databases, simple object storage, Kubernetes, load balancers, block storage, and one-click apps. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about is getting from a minimum viable product to a minimum lovable product, and the way that we do that, which has a lot to do with finding and listening to our customers. So that's what we're going to focus on. So building something new is always difficult, right? I mean, you're creating something from nothing. And now, especially with all the challenges that we have, the worldwide pandemic, that can feel more difficult than ever. But I want to point out some history and give hope. So some of the greatest tech companies in the world were built in the period during and after the last recession. And so we can see that even as things are difficult, new ideas are being born. And in some cases, and in some ways, you can almost say that these types of challenging times are most fruitful for creating something new. If we look at what Founder Institute has to say about maximizing startup advantages during a downturn, some of the advantages that a startup or a new endeavor has in a tough time is that we can move quickly, while big companies might need to be reorganizing. Downturns create new problems that entrepreneurs can solve. We can save on costs because we're lean to start. We can find the talent out there that might be seeking opportunity while big companies might be shedding workers. And we always have to keep in mind that all recessions end and hardy startups are the readiest to rebound. But just because hardy startups are the readiest to rebound doesn't mean they automatically will. Right? Hardy startups are the readiest to rebound, but those that ignore user needs never come back. And so how do I know this? Right? How can I how can I talk about that challenge? Well, it's because in 2000 to 2001, I was part of a high-profile startup, and we were doing fun and interesting, amazing things. We had the backing of some prime venture capitalists, but certainly when some of the challenges hit here in the United States in 2001, we really weren't able to rebound from them. And I'm going to use that as a lesson for us to tap into as we talk about listening to our customers and users and building a minimum lovable product. So to understand the challenge that I went through back then, you have to kind of roll your mind back, either remembering or imagining the year 2000. This is what a cell phone looked like back then. We actually just got past the point where everybody was worried that all the computers in the world would come to a screeching halt on midnight of 12/31/99. And I got the opportunity to work with a few smart people from MIT out of the lab for computer science that thought that they could build a better search engine. We created a product that let you ask natural language questions way back in 2000, and it was great. It felt amazing. You could do a stock search for companies with revenues greater than $30 billion and a price to earnings ratio less than 20, and we'd be able to understand that query and bring back answers. And at the time, this tech felt like magic, and we were enamored by it. But at the end of the day, users didn't use it, and it's because we had a natural language search, but still a typing interface. We didn't have a speech interface, and nobody wanted to type full sentence queries. Right? The beginning when we started, we saw people typing 1.9 words on average. Even 4 years later, when we ended with an acquisition, that average query length had only reached 2.1 words. And so how did we fall into this trap, right? I mean, we had so much going for us, great investors and great tech. What happened, right? VCs bought in, customers were paying us. We were actually making money. We had really smart engineers based here in Massachusetts. We'd say they were wicked smart, but we were heavily invested in our solution, but not talking to users all the time. And this was early in my career. In hindsight, it's 2020, but this has stuck with me. And I've come to realize that this is the biggest mistake that you can make when bringing something new to market. So what could we have done differently, right? It's sort of easy to say, well, just talk to more users, but let's peel that back a layer and understand tactically what that can mean and how we can achieve that. So the key ideas here in this webinar, we'll just really hit on maybe 2 or 3. One of them is, while we might be builders at heart, I mean, a lot of us come from different backgrounds, but if you share any of my background, love to make things, love to create things, love to put things out into the world. Building is fun, but really, from an efficiency perspective, it's pretty important to build just enough to learn something critical that you don't know or that feels risky. And so let's dig in to this a little bit further, right? We see lots of examples in the tech world of doing this successfully. And so, for example, Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn fame, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late, right? So let's take a look at what some of those early products felt like, right? Because we sometimes think of the products as they stand today, but LinkedIn, right, one of its earliest iterations, you can see very early on. Twitter, this was Twitter way back in the early days. Didn't even have enough to afford the vowels in the domain name. Amazon, even, if we roll way back, we can see what an early version of Amazon looked like, right? So it's not really fair to compare ourselves to these services as they stand today, right? I mean, as startups, we got to get started somewhere. Even at DigitalOcean, when we bring something new to market, like our marketplace, 2 years ago, we started from a pretty scrappy view where we just had a description of the things that you could launch with one click on DigitalOcean. So if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've probably launched too late. Okay, so where should I start, right, as I'm trying to learn from customers, as I'm trying to build a business? The answer to me, their experience, is riskiest first, right? The thing that I should focus on as a startup founder, somebody starting a new project, somebody building a new product, right? Somebody who's creating something new. Let's get to the riskiest things first, because those are the things that are likely going to trip us up, right? The things that maybe in the back of our mind or sort of deep down in our gut make us uncomfortable. Those are definitely the places to start. And so we can take a look at a model of new product development. So this is the model based on IDEO, design thinking. And again, all links will be shared afterwards, but this might help us figure out where the riskiest part is right now, right? With every new launch, with every new project or product, there's an intersection of three things: feasibility, desirability, and viability. Right? Feasibility, can I build it? Desirability, does anybody want it? And viability, can I make enough money off of this to keep it running indefinitely? And so when we think about risk, we could think about the risks of feasibility, desirability, or viability, right? And a hint from what I've seen and experienced is it's usually not feasibility that's the biggest risk. Of course, there are exceptions, right? Of course, there are times when you're trying to invent or build something so new, so groundbreaking, that fundamental research is required, right? That you're going to have to figure out a new way to manufacture, produce, develop, design something. But most of the time, the real questions are around desirability. Does anybody want this thing? And viability. Can I make money off of it? And so I'm going to use framework from two quintessential business books. They really drive a lot of my thinking. I want to give all props to Eric Ries and to Ash Maurya. But the Lean Startup, if you haven't read it, is amazing, and it sort of goes through philosophical view of how to start successful businesses with an experimentation first mindset. And then Running Lean by Ash just goes into a ton of the practical details. We're going to tap into some of those practical details to help us go down that next level of identifying areas of risk, right? And then continually de-risking them. So coming from the book Running Lean, we have this notion of a lean canvas, which is based on former work around the business canvas. All of these are accessible. I highly recommend, again, the books, as well as Ash has a site around tracking and building out a lean canvas, which is awesome. But the fundamental value of this is that it gives you a single page view of all of the aspects or considerations of a business or a startup, a new project, a new product, something that you're trying to bring into existence. And so it's a great place for us to think about where our risks are, and which part of this overall business, startup, or project or product are riskiest. And it even goes through a pretty good model of how you might walk through each of these. Now, of course, really what it's meant to be is a guide for you to walk through in any way that you see fit. And the important question for you to ask yourself is, where do I have the biggest risk? What am I most uncomfortable with? But in case you have similar biases to mine and you want to jump straight to the solution, this ordering helps realize that oftentimes the best place to start and the riskiest are identifying the problem for a given set of target customers and making sure that you can identify a unique value proposition for that customer segment's top problems. That's really the crux of starting something that is customer-led, customer-driven, and that's going to result ultimately in a lovable product. And so, again, we can go through this model in any way that we want, but let's sort of follow this recommended approach for now, and think about those first two things, right? Those first two things, like I said, maybe are not the number one things that you want to work on immediately, but they're often the riskiest. And so a good starting point, what problems am I trying to solve and for who? So what's the simplest way to answer these questions, right? Or what's the simplest way to test these things? And so again, if you share my biases, and not everybody does, but if you share my biases, you might feel like, well, you know what I'm going to do? I know exactly what I want to build, right? Maybe I have a rough idea of a customer segment. Maybe that customer segment even looks like me in my mind. And so I'm just going to start building something, and then I'm going to launch it. Well, that's a very costly way to try and answer the question of who am I targeting and what problems do they have? So instead, maybe we'll start with an even simpler way to get at our target segment and their main pain points. And that's just to talk to people. You know, as a startup founder, even as a technical startup founder, even as somebody who maybe builds software, product, designs processes, or manufacturing day in and day out, I think one of the best and most important things that you can do to de-risk your startup is talk to people outside the building. Now, inevitably, when I talk about this concept, people often jump straight to the, great, how do I find the right people to talk to? And I've often just sort of given off the cuff answers. And I realized that, you know, I'm in a unique position, at least at this point, working here at DO. I'm lucky we have hundreds of thousands of customers. I can find subsegment of people to talk to in a matter of minutes. And because we're DigitalOcean, when I reach out, they're gonna typically pick up the phone or answer my email and talk to me. And I realize that this is a genuine problem, right? Finding the right people to talk to. And so I tried to remember back to the times when I was starting something on my own. It's just me and one other person, group of 10 of us at some point in our early days. And how did I find the right people to talk to then? And so I'm going to do a quick run through 10 ideas of how to find people to talk to. So step one, or idea number one, tap your network directly. Often overlooked, but you're on social media most likely. You've got LinkedIn connections, you're on Facebook, like just start reaching out. Might be uncomfortable, might feel like you're bothering people, but just start reaching out. I think that's one of the fastest and easiest ways. Second idea, start producing content. This is DigitalOcean's claim to fame way back at the beginning. Almost before there was a product, there were tutorials. And tutorials are a great way to get attention and to get marketing and to get people in the door. But they're also, content is also a great way to attract people to have conversations with you. So if you're not writing, posting, blogging on Medium, then you're missing out on opportunities to talk to people. Advertise. This is something that I did when I started a company on my own. Take some money. It doesn't necessarily have to be lots of money, but it does take some money to advertise. But at least you get a reliable stream of people coming in your door. You can capture email addresses. You can connect with them. You can even chat with them directly on your site when they come to it. And then maybe just a thought here, throughout Microsoft advertising as a place to go, not because we have any affiliation with Microsoft, but just because as a startup, you're constantly looking for ways to get the most bang for your buck. Maybe advertising on the Microsoft network is easier or cheaper than Google these days. Landing pages, put something up there that's that you're pointing people to, whether it's through advertising or through social media. Get people to a site, even if you don't have a product yet. Just putting a single page up can start to get you a place to engage and have conversation. MailChimp has a great landing page tool. DigitalOcean, you can spin up a WordPress droplet in a matter of minutes and have a site up and running for people to engage with. Forums, get out there online, whether it be on Reddit or Hacker News or Indie Hackers or a community site that's better aligned with the type of product or service you're offering, right? So here's an example of a community discussion board on the Motley Fool for finance topics. Just lean in, start conversations, start responding to people's posts. Pay for interviews, you can always use a tool like Respondent, even more expensive than advertising, but it'll get you guaranteed user interviews for folks that match up with your profile. You can build a free tool for your target audience, maybe before you even start building out the product or service that you ultimately want to offer. Decide whether there's something simpler that your target audience needs. Give it away to them for free as a way to capture email addresses and start conversations. DigitalOcean does this with several free tools, but this one is an example of an Nginx config tool, something that makes it easier to configure a web server. Kickstart it. Great way to start a following of people who might be interested in your idea. Requires a little more effort than some others because typically you want your video and your site to capture attention, but kickstart it. Host or crash a virtual meetup. These days, tons of meetups happening online. Go to meetup.com, find some that are most likely to be interesting to your target audience and join in, or host one of your own. And then the often overlooked cold email, as annoying as it is sometimes to be on the receiving side of these, with a little bit of effort, you could probably figure out email addresses of people in your target audience, and you try reaching out. And as long as you have something that might be useful and valuable, never hurts to try and connect that way. Okay, great. So a little bit more explicit there about how to find people to talk to. Hopefully those help. There are a lot more ideas too. I would just say get creative and get scrappy about finding people to talk to. But once you found those people, what should you ask them? So this is a great question. Anything is better than nothing. Sort of like usability testing. Any amount of usability testing is better than none. So just start talking. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want, there is a more structured approach that you can make use of in order to gather valuable feedback from your target audience without biasing them towards your solution, without jumping straight to the answer, but instead by truly understanding the problems that your customers have. And so a framework that we use here, though it's not ours, I mean, we haven't created it, but jobs to be done framework is a great way to structure the outcomes of your interviews, right? So what we're trying to achieve is a way of identifying the job that a user has in mind without even realizing they have it in mind, right? So rather than trying to figure out the solution, what exactly a user needs, right? Like as a user, I need a big blue button that I can push and get an answer to my question, right? Like that's a solution. Instead, jobs to be done give us a framework for capturing a situation, the reason why a user cares about that situation and expected outcome. And so we're trying to achieve this, right? We're trying to get to the point of capturing as many jobs to be done from our target users as possible. This is sort of a way of expressing the pain, problem, challenge that those users have. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to interview users, but we're going to try our best to interview users without biasing them or influencing them, but instead getting them to talk in their own words about their challenges and needs. Once we've done enough of them, we're going to synthesize those by writing down jobs. And then ultimately, we're going to map these into user stories. And I've got reference for materials for each of these, but we're going to dig in a little bit more, especially on these first two, interviewing users and then synthesizing those down to jobs. So here's an example straight from an interview that DigitalOcean has done with its users. And And I'm going to read it, and I want to make sure you notice that we do everything we can to not bias towards our solution, our approach, our outcome, right? A lot of times when you interview people, you just sort of want to get confirmation or validation that the direction you're going is right, but that's not what you're trying to do when you're doing these types of interviews. Instead, you want to do something open-ended, like tell me about a specific instance where you faced a particularly difficult situation with a tool or solution that you or your team was using. This is the way we asked it. And we got an unbelievable array of responses back. We got a lot of color, and we got some pretty deep understanding of what our users were trying to do. Now, of course, we set some context here, right? Before asking this first question, we introduced ourselves. We talked a little bit about cloud in general. We asked the interviewee a little bit about their background, skill sets, and their role, right? So we set things up. But then the first question, the actual question we asked, was not something like, take a look at this product. Does it do what you need it to do? Instead, it was an open-ended question. And then a second open-ended question, what solution or tool and what was the story, right? Like, let's make sure that you can talk openly about what happened. And then following on from that, right, we sort of got our challenge. Let's instead ask about the flip side of this. Tell me about a specific instance where a tool or solution that you or your team was using worked particularly well, right? And then tell me the story. This is getting our target customers, our interviewees, talking pretty broadly and openly about their pain points, times when things have worked out well for them, right? If we're going to put in all that upfront effort of finding people to talk to, creating content just to get them through the door so that we have a list of people that we can interview when we want to, we want to make sure they're the ones doing most of the talking, not us. Okay, so then what do we do with these interviews, right? We've gone through, we do even just one interview, but so we've done 1, 2, 3 interviews. How can we summarize some of our learnings, right? Often at this point, when you're asking these questions back here, you've just got maybe pages of notes or a recording of the interview that you've just done. Let's turn that into something more tangible, a little better organized, right? And so that's where our jobs to be done outline is going to be helpful. We talk about a job as a situation, a motivation, and an expected outcome. And so following on with that real world example where we were just asking questions, one of the jobs that we teased out from those questions was our users at DigitalOcean telling us that when they're a very small team trying to build something new, they often want to use third-party solutions for large parts of it so that they can focus more of their time on the things that make them unique. This is an encapsulation of a job that we got from the interviews that we were doing. And you can write down dozens and dozens of these, usually just from a few interviews, right? You start to pull out these types of jobs to be done. And that alone, I mean, just that exercise alone of doing those interviews and then synthesizing the interviews down into jobs to be done can tell you a lot about what your customers need, where they're having success, where they might be having problems and pain points. But we can take that a step further. And so, again, not necessarily a structure that we developed here, just something that we embrace and take advantage of. So desired outcome mapping. And I'll actually, I just want to sort of mention the reference here, but we use this framework of innovation-driven development that makes use of the desired outcomes. Again, we'll follow up with links afterwards, but it's taking all those interviews that we did, the jobs that we baked them down to, and now starting to quantify the places where we could have the most impact with our new product or with our new service, right? And so we go back to those jobs to be done, which we've got dozens of them, and we start to identify desired outcomes, put them into groupings, right? So one desired outcome might be the one that we saw this example of back here, right? Focus more of our time on the things that make us unique. Right? That was one desired outcome that actually a number of interviews revealed. Another desired outcome might be automate as much as possible so that we have more time to focus on our customers. And so we get to these desired outcomes, we get into groupings of them. And now if we want to try and identify which ones we should focus on, we can do some more quantitative research that's going to get us the answer to two questions. For these desired outcomes, how important are they relative to each other, right? Maybe we've got a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen outcomes that our customers are looking for. How important are they relative to each other? And how well served do our customers feel by the market at large when they try and achieve these desired outcomes, right? So that's literally the two things we're trying to quantify about these dozen or 2 dozen desired outcomes. How important are each of these outcomes? And then how satisfied are our customers or our potential customers? How satisfied are they with the solutions available in the market today to achieve those desired outcomes? And let's take a look down one level of detail about how we might craft a survey like this. It's just going to be direct questions, right? We're going to take one of our desired outcomes, focus more on the things that make our company unique. We're going to ask our survey respondents, when thinking about your daily work, how important is it to focus more on the things that make your company unique, right? We're just literally asking for importance. And we're going to do the star rating or 1 through 5 rating, but we're just trying to get a quantitative assessment of how important each of these outcomes are. And then we want to get, similarly, a quantitative assessment of how well served our customers or our prospects feel about achieving these desired outcomes based on the tools available in the market today. So how would you rate your current set of tools and how well they help you focus more on the things that make your company unique? Again, we're just 1 through 5 rating. Get all this in, right? We get this survey back. And we can start to map out each of our desired outcomes, right? Each one of these points is going to be a different desired outcome, right? One of them might be the one that we were just asking about, focus more on the things that make your company unique, right? That might end up over here, for example, number 2. And we see that it's both very important and in this case, not served well enough for its importance. Maybe something right down here actually would be a perfect sweet spot of something that's important but not well served. But anything over here, sort of this quadrant is, or in this third of the graph, is going to be valuable for us to dig into. And so we dove way down, but just to kind of summarize, right? We want to make sure that we're on a path to building something, a product, a service, business that customers will love, not just try once and leave, not just like, but love. And to establish that feeling of love, we really have to understand our customers and their pain points. And so we just went through an example of how we might identify our customer segments pain points, right? Step 1 was we've got to be talking to people that are in our target market. And so we went through 10 different ways that we could identify individuals, right? We connect with individuals so we can start conversations with them. And then we talked about the types of questions we might ask to open-endedly tease out their problems. And then we talked about a way to capture that feedback, capture those pain points as jobs to be done. And then we talked about a way to get some quantitative assessment of how important each of those jobs are and how well served our customers or target customers feel by the market at large. So it's one way. There are lots of different ways to answer these questions. It's a way that we happen to use here at DigitalOcean, and it helps us answer those first 2. And we're not going to get through all 9 of these, but let's go through a couple more examples of areas of our business or startup that might feel risky now that we've identified our customer segments and their problems. So maybe a big question is, will my unique value proposition result in revenue? Right? Let's focus in on number 3. Do I have a single, clear, compelling message that states why we're different and worth buying? Now, the hard work, I mean, part of the hard work is coming up with that unique value proposition. I can't do that, right? Like, you have to do that work. But what I can help with is, how do you know whether you've got a single, clear, and compelling message that states why you're different and worth buying? I mean, you might have a message, you might have a sentence written down that could be a unique value proposition, but how do you know if it's clear and compelling? And so we go back all the way up to the same model, right? Riskiest first, right? So if this is the thing that's keeping us up at night at this particular moment in time, right? If this is the thing deep down in our gut that makes us worried for our business or our product, then this is what we focus on. And we have to figure out the simplest way to test this, right? Because we're a startup, and by definition, when we're a startup, things are lean. Even the best financed startups in the world have trade-offs to make. And so while there might be a lot of different ways that we could try and answer the question of how valuable our unique value proposition is, we're really looking for the simplest, or one of the simplest ways to test it. And I would say, maybe back to above, kickstart it. Not necessarily literally. I'm not saying that everything needs to go up on Kickstarter, but from a mindset perspective, I think we've got to get really comfortable putting something out there that communicates our unique value proposition and lets people in the real world respond to that. So rather than what might be a traditional approach to say, you know what, we're heads down, we're building our product now, our website is under construction, it's coming soon, we'll let you know. Instead, put what you've got out there, and more than that, put the effort into producing things like a video, like a landing page, that communicate your unique value proposition even before you've got your product, or even before you've got the next version or iteration of your product. You put it out there, and here's an example where we've done this at DigitalOcean, right? We're building out an app platform, makes it easier to deploy new web applications and services, new sites with one click, right? And we wanted to test that value proposition. So we put out our landing page. We talked about how we can make it easier, what some of the value is that we'll bring. And we test different versions of this, right? And we gather feedback, we see people signing up. Ultimately, what we're looking for is people willing to give us time or attention, willing to learn about the new platform, and spend what's often as precious as money, which is their time, or willing to pay us, right? I mean, for our betas, we'll charge just to understand whether there's a willingness to pay. And maybe even build something, right? I mean, I've talked a lot about the simplest path, but sometimes the simplest path is to build something that you can test and put into users' hands and see how they interact with and engage with it. And most importantly, at this point, if what we're trying to test is whether our unique value prop resonates, we've got to make sure that the thing we build has that value proposition encapsulated into it, and then measure, right? We got to see, we put something out there that matches this unique value proposition. Do we get people signing up? Do we get people paying? Do we get people coming back and giving us their attention? Okay, great, right? We're going through and we're doing this for each of these areas. And I know we haven't been able to talk about every single one of these, but I'm hopeful that with some examples and some pointers to the source materials for Lean Canvas can get you going in the right direction, or get you iterating, because I'm assuming a bunch of you are already in the right direction doing things and just need to iterate. So let's look at one more example, right? Let's look at channels. So maybe I've lined up my customer segments, my problem. I've got a unique value proposition and some solutions that start to embody my unique value proposition, right? Like I've started doing these things, but I don't know which channels are going to be most effective. Right? Which channels are best for reaching my target customers? So if I'm asking myself this question, it's because at this point in time, I feel like this is my risk. This is the thing that I'm most worried about, maybe the thing that most keeps me up at night. And again, I got to figure out the simplest way to answer this question or to test possible approaches. And when I think about channels, the simplest way to test this, probably not to build or rebuild a completely new product. It's probably instead to focus on the channels themselves, even if it means bringing people to a place that doesn't give them the product or service they're looking for yet, right? So let's try out Google Ads or Microsoft Ads. Let's try out Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Let's try out traditional media, although maybe not billboards right now, but let's try out different approaches, even if it means bringing users not to what will be the final product, but instead to a landing page, a sign-up page, even a page where they can pay for the product or service ahead of time and maybe get a discount or get a badge or special treatment as a VIP customer or a founding customer. We do this at DigitalOcean all the time. We test lots of channels. Google Analytics, great product for testing a number of channels. It'll show you where your visitors are coming from. We use it across our own web properties, including the product docs and our tutorials. But each of the tools and each of the channels has typically some way built in to measure their effectiveness. And so I think my main point is use the tools that are out there and available, and don't necessarily wait until you've got a fully baked product to test which channels are going to be most effective for you. You can find out the answer, at least a partial answer to that question, even before you've got a full product. And while you're testing channels, don't underestimate the low-tech channels, especially for certain types of products. Those might get sold directly. Not everything is necessarily a consumer-grade product that you're going to sell to hundreds of thousands or millions of people. Some products are high cost, high value, and if you can find even just a small number of businesses that need them, then you can make a viable business off of that. And so when you're experimenting with channels, you can even experiment with channels like direct email, cold calling, traditional advertising, local advertising, radio, and just make sure you've got ways to track the effectiveness of that. When you're doing cold emailing and cold calling, you track directly just by keeping notes and a good spreadsheet or CRM of the people that you're talking to and what percentage of them actually engage. If you're using more traditional media, like radio ads, the typical approach is to give away an offer of some kind and then track different offers in different channels. I'm not a marketing expert, and so what I'm going to leave this topic on is just some recommendations for good places to follow up, right? How do I figure out this marketing thing, especially if I'm not a marketer? Two companies that I'm not personally affiliated with and DigitalOcean's not affiliated with, but just happen to be resources that I personally use to learn more about marketing, Moz and HubSpot. So Moz has a great set of beginner guides around digital marketing that cover a ton of things. HubSpot, this is just one of many articles. HubSpot is often known as one of the great champions of content marketing, DigitalOcean as well. But these are great places to start and really dig in and learn more about digital marketing. If I had to boil it all down to one takeaway for finding the right channels, it's finding channels where the lifetime value of the customer that you acquire is much, much greater than the cost of acquiring that customer. It sounds simple, but in practice, it can be really challenging. But effectively, as a digital marketer, which all entrepreneurs these days need to be, this is what you're looking for, the channels that are going to reach your customers cost effectively and sustainably. Okay, great. So we've gone through, maybe not all of them, but in theory, we've gone through all of these boxes, put our check marks in, and we're done, right? Well, that seems a little too simple. And I think everybody on the call probably knows that this is not a list that gets checked off. This is something that you iterate on throughout the life of your company, your startup, your product, right? You're always going to have changes in the landscape, in the market, in the macro economy, in your customers and users and their needs and your competitors, right? So there will constantly be change. And I think the major point I'd want to leave this on is at any moment in time, you can know where to focus by figuring out where the biggest risks are, where you feel most uncomfortable across the business as a whole, and then finding the simplest way to de-risk those and to add comfort back in for that particular area. But I'll just caveat and say, a lot of what I talked about involves testing. Not everything requires testing, and I don't want to over-rotate. There are definitely some scenarios where you shouldn't test, where you should just do what you know. One example of that is industry standards, de facto standards, things that that users have come to expect. There's often no need to test. So, for example, when we talk about a shopping cart, everybody understands an e-commerce shopping cart these days. There's no need typically to try and test and iterate and learn from our users whether they want us to call it a shopping bag or a shopping box or what. I mean, typically people want a cart, and that's what they know and understand. So sometimes when standards or de facto standards are involved, we don't need to test. And sometimes when things are just broken, we don't need to test. If we know that that there are problems, that systems are down, that there are outages, that there are logistics problems, I mean, we just got to fix them, right? That's not something that needs testing and iteration. But all things being equal, your default tactic should be to iterate. Let's experiment, get feedback, make small adjustments, identify the next area where we need feedback, and just keep doing that over and over again. So takeaways, not to belabor them, but a path of least resistance is something that can lead us into the trap. Doing the things we feel most comfortable about, focusing on the things we feel most comfortable about can lead us to that trap. Instead, we should be actively de-risking the thing that makes us feel most uncomfortable at any given moment. And we should do that as efficiently as possible. We should do it lean, we should do it cheap, we should find the simplest way that we can get comfortable about that riskiest thing. Then we should move on to the next most uncomfortable thing and keep repeating. And maybe one other important takeaway, even in challenging times, you can create something valuable, but it's more important now than ever to solve real customer pain points. And all the links, as I promised, will be going out as a follow-up to this talk. But I think now is probably a good time to open it up for questions through the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jake. We have a bunch of questions to the audience. If you have questions, please type them in the questions box and we'll answer them live now. So first question, customers are expecting useful products nowadays. Isn't it risky to just put something out there that's not quite ready?
I think actually nowadays, more than ever before, customers are expecting that customers have had their expectations set that there are different types of products out there, whether it's through kickstarting, whether it's through early adoption of new services, NBC's Peacock TV. We see now more than ever people's willingness to try things out. I think the important thing is setting expectations correctly. So I'm not suggesting that we put something out there that's half-baked and position it as a final product, something fully baked or reliable. Instead, what I'm suggesting is that you find the people that are most interested in being early adopters of your product, and you get through to them and get them giving you feedback quickly. And that feedback might be on a half-baked product, but you gotta let them know that it's half-baked and it's a beta, it's early, it's not production ready. So I think there's I actually think there's more expectation these days, or more understanding that there are different types of products out there in the market in terms of readiness. And as long as you're clear with people when they get to your product about the state that it's in, I actually think there's interest, especially among early adopters, to try it out and give feedback.
Thanks. Does it make sense to test an MVP with a few customers before knowing what your unique value proposition is? Like, does it make sense to put that out in public before you build your MLP?
Yeah, I think it's fine to test an MVP before you know what your unique value prop is. In an ideal circumstance, you'd be trying to find your unique value prop before you go through the cost and effort and investment in building out a full product, right? So it's just a question of efficiency, but any tools that you have at your disposal, if you've got an MVP already, if you've got a landing page, whatever you can use to test out unique value prop, yeah, put it out there and use it. You know, a lot of the times we're so worried that the problem will be that we put something out there and it ends up skewered on Twitter at the top of Hacker News. Somewhere people are just railing against it, right? We do this here ourselves. We even talk about a product that's going to go into beta and we say, oh my God, what if people post about how horrible it is? The reality is usually it's the opposite. The real problem is usually that nobody notices or says a word about the thing. And so, yeah, I would say if you've got an MVP that can help you identify whether you have a unique value proposition, put it out there and start learning from it.
Wonderful. How does this apply to not-for-profit or government projects when it comes to MVP?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So government projects, I'm just going to tread carefully. I can't claim to understand government projects well enough to make statements there, but I have worked on not-for-profit projects. And so what I think you need to recognize is that all projects, products, and services, even if they're not for profit, have customers and have users. And so those might be the same, those might be different, but even when you have a not-for-profit project out there, your customers, people paying you, are going to be your benefactors, folks that are going to donate, government agencies that might fund. And so I think what you're trying to do, even with a nonprofit, is identify customers and their pain points, right? Like that could be that as somebody with 2 young daughters, my pain point is that I care that women around the world are treated fairly, right? Like you're still looking for your unique value proposition and the pain point, and only through lots of conversation can you find that. And then you also have to test whether or not it's viable, right? Even a nonprofit needs a path to sustainability. So I think both of those still hold.
How do you know that you have gone from an MVP to an MLP? Are there any specific metrics we can measure and understand to know that we've reached that point?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is sort of the question of like, how do you know you have achieved product market fit almost? And there's some good write-ups. Mark Andreessen has one of the best known about product market fit, but even he sort of does this dance of like, you know it when you see it. Usually one of the reliable indicators is people's willingness to recommend your product or service to others. That's one of the biggest ones that we rely on. We capture and track it through net promoter scoring. So if you just do a search for net promoter scores, you can learn a bit about that mechanism. But usually that's a pretty solid indicator that you're lovable, right? When people are willing to tell their friends, coworkers, peers, loved ones that they should use your product, you've reached lovability.
To test the MVP, are there any problems with collecting payments before incorporating, such as legal or sales taxes?
Yes, yeah, there are. And so I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, but I think I'll probably defer that question. It's definitely worth some research, maybe even talking to a lawyer or an accountant, but it is doable, right? I think the most important thing I will get across is that it is doable. Some mechanisms are already in place to make it really easy to do that and not worry about those concerns. So Indiegogo, Kickstarter are great examples of already existing platforms that allow for collecting payments without a clear tie to a required delivery at the end. But even on your own, there are ways to do it, again, as long as you're transparent and setting expectations appropriately. One great project that I know about is a product called Glowforge. It's a at-home laser cutter, and that company, Glowforge, effectively did its own kickstarting and raised millions of dollars, not from VCs, but from people who wanted to buy the product even 2 years before it was launched. So it's possible.
Cool. How should I protect my business case, or at least the technology aspects of the service? What is the best protection system to avoid a copycat?
Yeah, this one comes up a lot. I hear this often as sort of one of the major reasons not to put something out there too early. And so while there may be circumstances where that is an absolutely critical and crucial factor, and in those circumstances, you should be exploring things like patents and copyright protection around the world. Usually, I believe that people, and especially startup founders, overreact to the possibility that people will be stealing their idea, because the bulk of value in most startups that I've worked with and helped out is in the execution, not in the idea itself. This sort of harkens back to the 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration of Edison, right? So I guess what I would say is, if you really think there's something protectable, then go through the legal means to protect it. But more likely than not, you're going to get so much more value out of the feedback than you would lose from the potential of copycats.
All right, I think this is our last question, even though we have so many more that we have to answer here. We'll try to answer them on the page that Jake mentioned earlier in the coming weeks, but I believe this will be our last question. Don't you find it overwhelming to test your product and check the channels at the same time? How do you organize or coordinate all of this?
Yeah, I do find it overwhelming, which is why you can't do them all at once, right? This presentation sort of compresses everything and makes it look like, it's all on one page and you do them all at once. You just can't. I mean, especially as a startup, but even as a more mature company like DO, right? We're sort of a big startup. That's the way I think of us. We can't do all of these at once simultaneously. So this is why it's really important to pick the thing that is the riskiest at any given moment in time, right? Like find the thing that literally keeps you up at night because you're not sure about the answer, and being not sure makes you feel like this whole thing may not even exist, right? So find that scary, uncomfortable, risky thing and focus on that, and sort of, to the extent you can, put the other things aside, even if just for a day or a week.
Wonderful. I know I said that was the last question, but we just got one in that I thought was really great that we should ask right now. How do you test pricing? Do you need to do that? And if so, how?
Yeah, this is great. So there are a couple of ways to test pricing. There's sort of the quick and dirty pricing method. So if you're talking to people, you just ask them. But there are all sorts of biases involved in that. And so there are at least two different methods of analysis. One called, I think it's Van Westendorp. Another is conjoint analysis. A really great set of resources on this. You can read the blog on price intelligently. So there's a consultancy called Price Intelligently that focuses on pricing for SaaS products, but their blog posts in general about pricing and learning about pricing are great. Another place is a service called Conjointly. It's a service that allows for conjoint analysis and Van Westendorp analysis, but also has a good set of blog posts about pricing research.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jake, for sharing, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. So, Jake, any parting thoughts or words of wisdom for our audience before we sign off today?
Just find the riskiest thing and de-risk it over and over again. And I hope you can build something that people really love.
Woohoo! Well, go and find that risky thing, everyone. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you all again soon. Tell us how we did today and tell us what more you'd like to learn about next. Have a great week.
Thanks all.